Dr. Courtney Phillips, Vice President of Health Affairs and the Chief Health Officer at LSU, is moderating this session. And please welcome Dr. Phillips and our panelists, Whitney Breaux, Dr. Jonas Fontenot, Dr. Tonya Jagneaux, and Will Landry. So with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank y'all for hanging in with us on a Friday afternoon. Welcome to the Healthcare Happy Hour session. Clearly, you all wanted to be here for this one because you hung around with us for the best session. We're probably all a little biased by that. But at the end of the day, if we don't have health, then what else is there? And so today, I think we have a great group of folks who are dedicated here in the healthcare industry to talk to us about how does AI intersect with it. Look, we know here in Louisiana, we are a state of resilience. We know we're a state of innovation. But what does that look like for healthcare? Healthcare is no different. And so today, when we talk about the importance of health and the elements in it, and how do we utilize AI to continue to drive improvement and change across our state and across the nation. So with that, I'm going to turn it to each one of our panelists to introduce themselves. And I've asked them to also add in just a little bit just in terms of their background, their current location of occupation, but also how they got into the field of health. I think it's always important for us to know that origin of the interest. And then the other question I asked them when we did our little prep conversation is, did they ever think in their wildest dreams that we would be where we are today when we think of healthcare, technology, the intersection of AI? And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Tonya Jagneaux.
Thank you, and I do deeply appreciate you guys still being here, that you're the diehards, and so thank you so much for hanging in there. And I think that there's a reward for cocktails after Courtney.
Water shots.
Water shots, because it's healthcare. So Tonya Jagneaux, my background is critical care, intensive care medicine, and pulmonology. I always wanted to be a doctor. I can't remember a time back in school that I didn't want to do that. And I practiced intensive care medicine right through the end of 2020. We had a little virus come through and made some changes in what I was doing in practice at that time, primarily related to some health issues of my own, but I had already begun a transition into informatics and analytics. And so I got a master's in clinical informatics in addition to becoming board certified. And what that means is you try to get the right information to the right doctor at the right time. If you've been a patient and experienced, fill this out, get one more time, or let me tell you my story, get one more time, or did you get this right when I checked in? And it wasn't, you've experienced sometimes that failure of right information, but not always in the right place, the right person. And then following that, I've done a little bit more work in analytics, because as we begin to understand, and you've heard all day long, the importance of how data drives the quality of what we do. And so I've actually done some graduate work here at LSU, and I have had some folks who were in the room as my professor to teach me data science. So I'm really excited to be here, because I do geek out a little bit on this, and I suspect that we're in a common crowd when it comes to a bit of the nerd science that drives innovation and quality. And for us, it's all about taking care of patients. And so as you try to relate to what we're talking to, I think, for my goal, everything that we bring to a conversation is always about, what if I'm the person sitting across from a healthcare provider and I'm in the chair as a patient, and what does that mean? AI or whatever we talk about as far as technologies, what does that mean for me or my family being on the receiving end?
Thank you. Dr. Fontenot?
Thank you. I'll go next. I'm Jonas Fontenot. I'm the president and CEO of Bird Perkins Cancer Center, which is, I can assure you, purely accidental development in the arc of my professional career thus far. I'm a medical radiation physicist by training, found my way into the field accidentally. I was always pretty good at solving problems, but terrible at remembering things. And so it was a good fit for me to find my way into a field that I could use those problem-solving skills to figure out interesting problems, or what I thought were interesting problems, in a way that could be helpful to people and to society in some way. I spent 7 years in Houston at MD Anderson. That's where I did my didactic research and clinical training. Moved to Baton Rouge because of an academic partnership that Bird Perkins Cancer Center has with LSU, which is a great opportunity for me in addition to the clinical practice component. I got to work with residents and graduate students, had some research interests in actually developing neural nets that could help us solve some really geeky radiation oncology type problems. But also along the way developed an interest in health policy and healthcare economics. Did a health policy fellowship with one of the professional societies in oncology, got my MBA from LSU along the way, which my wife and our 2 kids were thrilled to hear about me returning to school yet again. And that ushered an opportunity for me into administration leadership. And I've been in this role for a little over 2 years now. So really excited to be here. I am firmly a science nerd and geek and very interested in how technology can help us solve complex problems. The potential for AI applications is really limitless in lots of different ways, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Fontenot. Ms. Breaux?
Oh goodness, I feel like one of the only not doctors up here, but okay, good. Oh, good job. Oh, I am not a science nerd, but that is actually the reason why I got into healthcare and why I do have such a strong appreciation for AI, is that it's a tool that I use daily to upskill myself to understand what the heck the doctors that I work with are saying most of the time. But it's great to be here, and a big thank you to everyone again. My name is Whitney Breaux. Right now, I have the distinct pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of Global Marketing for Eli Lilly and Company's Psychiatry Therapeutic Area. I've practiced that because my job title changed again last year. But essentially what I do is I'm responsible for the commercialization of new pharmaceutical medicines, innovative blockbuster medicines that can help make patients' lives more healthy. We partner with global organizations from around the world as well as healthcare groups in order to bring those medicines to market. And so my team and I lead that effort around the world. But I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so born and raised here. Went to undergrad at LSU, got a degree in political communication, and also did my MBA here at LSU. And immediately started at Eli Lilly and Company, I guess like a month after I finished my MBA. But I've really enjoyed the experience of learning about drug development and being a part of such an important process in improving health outcomes. We are looking towards the next line of innovative medicines to try to help, especially in the space around prevention and preventative treatments, as we think about the healthcare continuum and what's going to continue to cost not only healthcare systems and governments, but also patients, and the impact of what in all of these different chronic relapsing diseases, other conditions. If we have medicines that we could speed through the drug development process, that's important because it's meaning that we're getting medicines to patients faster. And that's the commitment of our team, from manufacturing to drug development and discovery to our marketing teams that are responsible for our launches. But for me, as well as a patient, I'm a patient here in Baton Rouge. I was diagnosed with cancer in 2020, and very proud to be a recipient of the services of Bird Perkins and Our Lady of the Lake and Women's Hospital. And it's continued to fuel for me my passion in healthcare, because I now get to sit in a lot of rooms with folks and not only speak from experience as a global healthcare or pharmaceutical executive, but also now as a patient. And to me, that's just as important as well. So looking forward to the conversation.
All right, my name is Will Landry. I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer for Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady Health System, which, if you're not familiar with that name, we're the parent company for Our Lady of the Lake and other Catholic health systems in Louisiana and Mississippi markets. Most people don't know, but we are now a $4 billion organization in the 2 states. So we've gotten pretty large, and we have a really good big footprint. So by history, or where I've come from, so I've always been a technologist. I graduated from LSU with the IS degree, or ISDS, and started in different areas and different fields, but settled in healthcare about 15 years ago, and I don't see myself doing anything other than healthcare because of what's interesting as a technologist. It is a unique industry where technology is forced upon the clinicians by the government in many cases, and our end users don't want the technology or haven't necessarily wanted the technology historically. And so it puts us in a unique position to deliver a service to users that don't really want it, which sets the bar very high. And where I think that what really excites me about where we are with AI today and where we're going to see it going in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe shorter, is removing technology from the room, from the patient rooms, or from the experience. And when I say removing, it's still there, but the interaction, it would be removed, right? So when you talk about ambient listening, or talk about like ambient note-taking and things like that, so that the clinicians can focus on the patients. because that's what they're there for. And I think what's going to be unique about this panel versus the other panels is that healthcare is very, very people-centric. The patient-centric, the clinician-centric, like people are at the, so technology is not going to remove the people, right? There's not going to replace, there might be some back-end jobs or ancillary jobs that change, but the core focus of healthcare is not going to remove people, but it can make it so much better, and that's what I'm excited about.
Thank you. I told y'all you're in for a treat with these healthcare superheroes here that represent our state. So, look, we talked a little bit, just you guys mentioned, in terms of research. And we know when we think about advancements in healthcare, we know that research has made a major dent and pushed us forward in terms of our capabilities. But when we think about AI, how does that intersect when we think about healthcare, science? Let's talk a little bit, Dr. Fontenot. You mentioned this briefly in your introduction about research. Tell us a little bit of how you think AI can be deployed for some of those complex issues when we think about research, science, and discovery.
I think one specific example from our organization that would not have been possible, even 5 years ago, is the implementation of it's a new piece of equipment and technology that we went live programmatically with a little over a year ago that combines state-of-the-art radiation delivery technology, real-time MRI imaging, and AI tools, all kind of bundled together in one platform. And what this allows us to do that we could not do 5-10 years ago is completely transform the process of how we plan and customize radiation therapy treatments. Historically, what would happen is that somebody has cancer, they get some imaging studies done, and then for the next 1 to 2 weeks that follow, the treatment team goes through the process of drawing on computers, literally drawing, the areas in the medical imaging that correspond to the cancer, and the areas that correspond to organs and normal tissues that we want to avoid. And then there's this elaborate process of going through different dose planning exercises to make sure we've got the right balance of dose to the cancer and avoiding dose to normal tissues. The suite of tools that I just described has the potential, the power, and we have implemented it to compress that process into about a 15 to 20 minute process, a 15 to 20 minute session, such that we can, on the fly, every day that a patient shows up for treatment, come up and create a completely unique plan of the day when they've arrived for care. What's the impact of that on the patient? The impact of that is that whereas 5 to 10 years ago, when it took us 6 weeks to deliver a course of radiation for a person with prostate cancer, we can now do that in 3 to 5 days. We're able to generate a lot more medicine, specifically the area that needs to be treated, in a much more accelerated way, reducing toxicity and side effects along the way. And these were things that were barely even conceivable as recently as 5 to 10 years ago. So, I mean, I can point to a lot of different areas of our clinic that we've started to bring in some AI applications to help us address various areas of how we deliver care or support our teams. But if I'm thinking in my mind, okay, what's the most transformational thing that we've been able to do as a function of AI tools, that would be it.
Great, thank you for that. Whitney, you want to touch upon it from your perspective, just from the pharmaceutical world?
Yeah, I can certainly, probably the one that's top of mind for me right now is clinical trial recruitment, and also real-world evidence and how we're leveraging publications and healthcare databases in order to identify potential patients that would be eligible for clinical trials. Because if we're able to speed enrollment, then we're able to move through the drug development process obviously a lot more quickly. But also when we think about different areas where we could study medicines. I think that in the past, whereas we would have gone through a very standard process of rat trials, phase 1, phase 2, and then blown out phase 3 clinical development programs, sometimes now we're willing to take risks and bets based on what we're learning real time in the market, based on how treatments are being used both on label and probably sometimes off label as well. But that information is super helpful to help us make better decisions about where we will study certain molecules and certain drugs and where it can possibly have the best impact for patients.
So it's interesting because we've heard the terms expedite, speed, compress. And sometimes when folks hear those terms, they get a little nervous when we talk about AI in healthcare. And they're wondering, is my healthcare being compromised? Dr. Jagneaux, can you talk a little bit just in terms of, while we say those terms and we're using them and we need them to be able to push forward, what does that really mean for the patient? Because we're not compromising their care.
Right. I think these are great examples, and when you say research, my mind goes to so many places, some of which is in the actual question about the science. You know, does the treatment help this person in a way that we relate to what we would say was evidence before, which is this rigor of going through animal trials and then limited observations with human trials, and then looking post-production, is there harm? And that takes years. And if you find the discovery of a life-changing therapy, it usually takes 10 years after that process to put it into practice, to change the thinking, because doctors have gone through med school, they've learned what they should have learned, and then this new thing is only going to be generated to the next folks that are coming through. And so when you speak of efficiency in operations, some of this is just getting that to people. One of the tools, and a lot of what we do in the research space involves good data, clean data, and ideally the data that represents the people we're treating. And so that gets into equity and making sure that we don't get into bias because we trained on one population, but we're using that tool in a different looking population, or we weren't diverse enough. So we can get not only expedited, but better quality of answers for people. One of the tools that is embedded and is rolling out in our electronic health record, which we do rely on a lot because we heard earlier today about the potential harms for sort of the tools built in a garage, even though that's where Amazon started. That's not a good place to go searching for healthcare products and AI tools. And so we do rely on our Epic or our big electronic health record name developers to bring some of these tools. There's one that a physician can look to a broad database of all the patients that are connected by that health record and go, what condition do you have? And if I add this drug, what can I expect as the outcome? If someone potentially has a type of malignancy or rheumatoid arthritis or a condition, and they might be matched with several thousand people around the globe, and that information can be available to a physician who can say, if I pick this drug, this is expected. But if I pick this drug, this is expected. And that's really powerful. That's finding essentially a small collection or population of people to do your own little research study at the time that you're having the conversation and delivering care to a patient. So I'm looking forward to the time where we've compressed the time to get what you need, but we're also better at giving you what's helpful to you going forward. And then in the ideal state is we are making sure that we're taking into consideration all the aspects of the patient sitting in front of me. Not only their condition, but their environment, where they live, the influences for their health. I can prescribe this medicine, but if you don't have access to it, it's not helpful to you. So using AI tools to bring the entire complexity of managing either chronic disease or acute conditions that may be rare helps with better taking care of the person in front of me, and then over time, better care for the community, for the population that we serve. Knowing that here in Louisiana, many things to love about it. Unfortunately, we love so many of things that make us not a healthy state. And so we have lots of opportunity to grow in that space to deliver better preventative health care. And so it may be some questions about in 10 years, what should I be thinking about today to intervene based upon the track record that you're showing me as a patient today. So I think it's hard to separate efficiency and timing with the quality. They are interwoven because of the speed and the ability to wrap your hands around all the complexity that goes into health, and the ability for AI to tackle both of those questions simultaneously.
And you touched upon just Louisiana healthcare outcomes, and I think we all know where we stand just in terms of our overall health rankings and when you talk about chronic disease and access. And so when we think about here in Louisiana, for any of you, what does it really look like, and where do you think that AI has the greatest potential to really dive in and impact our Louisiana healthcare outcomes? And that's across the greatest potential, that we could really utilize AI to impact Louisiana's healthcare outcome, the disparities that exist, rural, urban. We know we have work to do, and we constantly chip away, but we can never make that great big leap.
Yeah, I think some of the things that we've done and we're continuing to do and always trying to get better at is use it, like looking at our data sets and using our tools to look at social determinants of health and outcomes and where we see, underserved zip codes or underserved parishes and where can we, I know that Dr. Jagneaux didn't speak up, but she leads a lot of these efforts in our health system as far as like trying to make sure that we have that available. And when we talk about, the data sets that we have, we operate in Louisiana and Mississippi, which are historically two of the least healthy states in our country. So we have pretty good data around, chronic disease and chronic illnesses. So that is, we've been really focused on that the last few years on access points and making sure that we have clinics in the right areas or trying to get more clinics in those areas or reaching out to those populations and managing those. But it's not just one health system that can do that, right? So we've actually we do have partnerships with other health systems in the states as well too that are trying to work through that, and we obviously with LSU that we're working through those as well.
It warms my heart that the administrator spoke very favorably of one of my projects. But spot on, and I think when you talk about, especially this day and age, and I'm not going one way or the other politically, but no one wants to waste money, and so no one wants to boil the ocean and say, let's go cure poverty, let's go cure homelessness. What we need is, hey, if we targeted this area because we recognize a lot of folks with heart failure are readmitted from this area. They're in a food desert, their access to care is poor, and at the end of the day, the year, or a certain chunk of time, it costs this much money to do nothing, or you can spend this much now and save this much down the road with healthcare costs. And one of the things I would like to do, because I think data can tell the story, is we first had to ask the questions of people. Do you have enough to eat? Do you run out of food? Do you have difficulty getting your medications filled? And as we build that database, and those are true answers, those are not data sets that are going to go down, and it's not combined data, it's actual, I saw this person, these are the things that they solve very expensive problems without a plan. It has to be a legitimate business plan. Healthcare is no different.
Well, we know a large portion of budgets across the nation are dedicated to healthcare. And so you just alluded to the cost, and we know healthcare systems in Louisiana, the nation, we're all under pressure to do a little bit more with less. Workforce shortages, rising costs, increasing patient demand, they all highlight the need for operational efficiency, and we alluded to that a little bit. But for each of you, how have you utilized AI and leveraged it in your operational planning, organizational efficiency to really enhance your resource allocation and just your overall operation? If you each can talk about it just from your perspective in your organization and give some examples to the folks in the audience.
Yeah, I'll start. One of the areas, from an operations standpoint, a big gap for us, or where we have a lot of needs, is in our revenue cycle space, which for those of you that aren't familiar with healthcare, revenue cycle is basically billing and contract management with payers and things like that. So we have, a lot of high turnover and challenge to get talent in that area, but it's also a space that is a big frustration with healthcare too, from a patient perspective, right? With and we were talking about, you mentioned earlier about the time and shortening time and being more expeditious. That's an area where I think everyone would agree, and patients definitely want to see that happen faster, right? Whether it's denials or pre-authorizations and things like that. So that's where we as a health system have been more aggressive in that area and trying new tools, or just trying new pilots to see what can improve, because we know our payers are doing the same thing on the other side. So the more that we can automate and shorten time cycles in that process, the better for the patient and our clinicians. And then it goes to coding as well too, like physician coding. Although I think our physicians do a great job with coding and putting encounters in the right tiers or in the right levels, but it's not always what the payers want to see. And sometimes we have to try to match that so we can reduce denials.
love AI and I love Copilot. My team calls it Co-Wit because I start each day with it. And so just very practically, any work, thought, assignment, or anything that I'm working on probably starts with a Copilot search on our work setting. Because if I think about 150 years Eli Lilly and Company has been around, we do have a large wealth of information and knowledge and experience in launching drugs and in bringing new medicines to market. And so to assume that, what I'm faced with or the challenges that I have are fresh and are truly brand new would probably be a bit naive. And so I really try to leverage it to help with brainstorming ideas, with challenging my thinking, with giving some questions back about maybe what would senior leadership ask if I'm trying to kind of advance something through our business plan process, for example. So, I use it daily, and I think that it's something that if you get started and you practice with it, you slowly get to see just how much it can really help. I even asked it this morning, like, what do I use AI for? And it says, Whitney, Co-Wit uses it to help author emails or what. But I think that efficiency doesn't just come in some of the back house spaces, but it also comes in my ability in leading my team and in leading our cross-functional groups to have the space to think and to really challenge myself before kind of just jumping into different assignments and activities that we have.
Yeah, I think there are a number of people dedicated to reviewing charts to try to identify patients who might qualify for a trial. And so having an AI tool to help assist with that process is powerful. And there's one study last year from one of the academic cancer centers that estimated that while it may be the case today that only 3 to 5% of adult patients, cancer patients, participate in clinical trials, their study of the implementation of AI to identify additional candidates could triple or quadruple that number. So it's really powerful opportunities, I think, and to be realized that can be capitalized on in a variety of different ways. I think we're just scratching the surface there. I heard Will mention earlier ambient technology. This is an agent that listens to the conversation between a physician and a patient in the room. That's something that we've done some implementation of. It can be a huge time saver depending on the documentation preferences of the physician. But we've done a lot of work in that area. I talked a little bit earlier about some of the technology stuff. On the imaging and radiation therapy delivery side, improvements in efficacy of new treatments that we're rolling out. We have stopped measuring certain things in the radiation therapy space because we now have the predictive power of AI to be able to tell us in advance which things we need to be concerned about in terms of the characteristics of some of the dose plans that we're developing, and which we can more reliably use some lower acuity tools to help confirm. So I think it is driving efficiencies throughout various areas of our operations en route to what I think and I hope will be really transformational improvements to not only how we deliver care, but the process of developing better predictive analytics that will ultimately get us to a place, I think, of true value-based care, which we talk about a lot in healthcare, but nobody's figured out. But I think that is achievable with what AI can do.
I do want to plug that this will be our 4th participation in the students project that you heard with Dr. Haggerty, and you saw Dr. Kowali up here. And this semester we're having them build a knowledge management system for us, which is, I pitched this idea where I created an AI image of a room just full of documents, and I said somewhere in here is the piece of paper I need. And that's something that our nurses and our care team members go through every day is, I need to know where's a protocol for this, where's a policy for this. And sometimes it's a critical time frame. So someone may have stuck themselves with a needle, so it's an exposure. And not everyone has memorized what you're supposed to do when you might have been exposed to something potentially infectious, and there's certain procedures you have to go through. So if we build these tools so that they could just, like you could ask Mike GPT or ask Chat GPT, we can build that into our own policy-informed system with consents, with tip sheets, with anything that can just remove the time that a nurse or someone who should be delivering care spends doing anything administrative. And you think about how much better the patient experience is and how much safer and higher quality the patient's experience is. So I do want to make them happier by being efficient, but at the end of the day, I really want to measure that they can get their clinical work done to the highest potential that they can. They're practicing at the highest ability their license allows, and they're not being secretarial, they're not chasing things that we just simply don't need to search for because we have this technology. So I'm looking forward to the students build this tool out. We've actually hired 2 students from previous classes to take the work that we built here and then bring it over to our side and implement it. And we've heard that this is a similar ask of many industries, but I think we can brag on the fact that it may actually, in cumulative state, be life-saving at some point.
Absolutely. We'll get more into the crossover between academia, policy, programmatic, and industry, and the needs around that in a second. But before we do, let me ask you guys, what do you feel is essential for AI? Because we talked about all the positive things that could happen, but we also want to make sure AI doesn't widen the gap that exists in some of our healthcare disparities and outcomes. And we know that it's only as good as information going into it, into the individuals, as Whitney had pointed out, of the person using it, initiating the prompts. And so how do we make sure that we use it as a tool of success and it doesn't bring us back further in terms of our healthcare efficiency and outcomes? And anybody can take it.
Talking to my peer about that, and he was complaining and upset. And that's when it really hit that, like your comment just now hit me, that, well, back then, and I had that conversation with Microsoft, is you can't put these stipulations, because basically we're creating a system now where us and Ochsner and a few others can afford these things, but our critical access facilities or other mid-sized hospitals in our states can't. Now, they've since changed that. I think it took them about 12 months to change that policy around the minimums around Copilot. But we have those same conversations with a lot of our vendors. And it is a concern that the larger health systems and the larger health entities can implement these technologies and tools, but the smaller ones, especially in the rural areas, cannot, or don't know how to implement them, or don't have the talent to implement them and do it properly. So that is something that's been a passion of mine as far as we've been working and trying to connect with partners in those communities to bring them some of our technologies where we can and where we will do that. But I think it is a gap. While AI can definitely help close those gaps, like we talked about earlier, and Dr. Jagneaux talked about, with using the data to look for gaps and to try to solve it, but it will also, there's going to be situations where certain health systems and users are going to have access to it because it all, I don't know if we talked, I didn't hear it called in other panels, but right now, like full-blown uses of AI is extremely expensive. We're doing it in pilot situations, or I know probably Mary Bird is too. But for us to just turn it on for everybody, it's not financially scalable. And so as we kind of move more into that, or as it becomes more available, I think it will help close those gaps. But right now, it is very expensive.
Can I build on that? I also see, though, an opportunity for AI to be able to extend the unique and scarce programs or resources that exist in large integrated health systems, academic health programs. I think of cancer care, for example. There's a general shortage of physicians who want to be involved in cancer care. That's not just true of cancer care. So we have locations throughout the state, and we can find, on occasion, physicians who are interested in serving some of those remote parts of the state. But the oncologist going to a remote part of the state isn't necessarily going to be the thing that moves the needle for cancer care in that community, because that person, that physician, is going to show up, and they're also going to find, well, there's no radiologists there. There's no pathologists there. There's no dedicated high acuity resources in specialty care locally accessible to be able to do the work, even if the physician who can drive the treatment decision making around care is on site or is accessible. So to me, I see an opportunity through the combination of of AI and cloud-based tools to be able to scale out from the FMOLs, the Oshner's, the MD Andersons, the Mary Bird Perkins of the world. Those tools that are truly unique and rare, and make them more easily accessible throughout communities that have traditionally suffered from a lack of access to those high-quality tools.
Well, I think it was going back to what Mr. Landry said, is making sure that somebody is the voice of that. Because we could all have that intent, but unless those who are playing and sitting at the table are advocating for it, then we miss the mark of what we absolutely could do. But this is a way, especially in a state like Louisiana, to be able to help solve the current gap that exists today in our healthcare access. You wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, the key piece is it can solve it. It just has to be deliberate and intentional to solve it. I'll just throw this out there. How many of you know of or use Python as a language? Okay, and you've heard of it. So our electronic health record, there's a team of folks there who, when we discuss deploying AI, whether it's machine learning or their features, they said, well, most places that are our customers, they have Python coders. And I laughed and I said, absolutely not. We have maybe 3 or 4 dedicated folks who could speak that language well enough to write code in our institution. We're pretty big. You heard $4 billion. And there's probably a few areas and pockets of institutions that have that kind of expertise, particularly if you're attached to an academic component, a medical center with a campus that has a strong computer science. But most places, when you think about community hospitals and facilities, don't have any of that expertise. And so they don't even know what they don't know they should be delivering. It's out of reach, and I'm unaware of it completely. And so with that in place, everyone who's served by that hospital is now not being able to experience the benefit of AI and the technologies that Jonas just described. So I do think it's going to take intentionality to close the gap that is less about how good the AI is and how important it is to make sure that it is appropriately distributed to those places. Because what we see now is we don't have enough physicians, hospital beds, healthcare resources. And so when we talk about not having AI take our jobs.
About just the technical expertise that some of our healthcare entities will have, some that will not have that technical expertise at this time. I know each of you in your role in your organization probably get bombarded by someone, an AI vendor, tech solution, or someone who may not even be trying to push a platform or a product, but who says, I have the technical expertise to help you evaluate. And so we have some folks in the audience who either have smaller businesses, come from smaller healthcare organizations, government as well. From my perspective, we were inundated with folks saying, we can help you, here's the next best solution, or we can help you evaluate. Give these folks a little bit of advice of how to navigate that, how to deal with the vendor overload, or what should they be looking at in terms of evaluating somebody who's going to give some technical expertise or particular platforms. I mean, Dr. Landry, you talked about how difficult it is and expensive right now. And so how do I know what I really should be looking at or should be doing at this stage as a smaller healthcare facility?
Yeah, I would say if you are a vendor, if you have a small business that's trying to sell technology or solution or AI solutions into healthcare, first and foremost, you have to be absolutely dedicated to healthcare. Or like that, you have to be all in, because it is a unique industry, and you have to understand the terminology and the lingo. And I think too that just from an understanding of that, like Dr. Jagneaux mentioned earlier, everything that we're doing from a clinical perspective has a life on the end of it. So there is no, like, failure is not an option when it comes to testing and for clinical. So we are very careful and cautious when it comes to any type of AI tools or any type of technology tools that touch the clinical space. So just be aware of that as well. And I don't know, we're not unique in that space. Like every health system I know is very cautious on the clinical side. There are a lot of opportunities on the revenue cycle side, as I mentioned, or the back office side, and we're willing to kind of try anything because like Dr. Jagneaux mentioned, we are looking for technology to fill those empty jobs. But I think those would be some of my advice in that space.
Anyone else?
It is constant. You know, the it's really across every possible task or role that you can imagine. And so trying to understand what's real versus marketing is a real challenge. You know, for us, most of how we go through the process of even choosing what we want to start to engage with starts with prioritizing what are the most important problems that we think this technology can help with. And then from that, you know, you do need to have the critical mass internal to the organization to be able to have somebody on your side of the table who understands what the capabilities are and can help you assess whether the solutions being brought to the table from the vendor has the characteristics that you think will ultimately help solve that problem.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's easier to get into this space if you are less close to the patient with whatever your application is. The closer you get to the patient, the more rigid the privacy rules are, the more high risk the game is for harm. And it really is hard if you are not a big player in the space like Meta, Amazon, Google, those kinds of high-level capabilities to look at information and be able to provide that service and guarantee it. And I didn't mention any medical companies, but it's that level of, you know, you're in the top 10 if we're going to consider anywhere close to delivering care from an AI tool. One of the things that was passed last year from the FDA was the regulatory piece of who owns the responsibility of what you deploy if it's caring for a patient. Software is a medical device. It's a new thing, and it's kind of a gray area when you look at some tools that are maybe care, maybe they're supportive, but if they fall into care and we deploy them, we're responsible for the validation accuracy of the model. Not having created it, and it's most of the time for entities, it's a black box. But you're responsible for how patients are treated with this technology you've deployed, which makes it all the more challenging and all the more difficult to invest and go down that road into something that is what we would say might be, you know, an X-ray machine. Is it high quality? Is the picture well enough for me to look at it? And now we have an AI tool where it's much more challenging to go, is it actually doing the thing that I'm expecting it to do to help take care of the patient? So you're going to see far fewer small entities because of that responsibility of demonstrating to me that you have reached the level of expertise to care for our patients. And that has to come across, and that is not something that small companies, I think, can take on, at least not at this stage. That may change, but that's what I think the bottleneck is into care delivery with AI tools.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, Dr. Jagneaux, is the work that you all at FMOL have been doing with LSU in terms of AI and some of the partnerships that the provost has started with students and industries. When we think about where we're headed in terms of the world of academia, AI, whether someone is graduating from the School of Business with an MBA or an MPA or whatever that degree is that that person is pursuing, when we think about AI in healthcare, are there specific things that you all would love to see from the university for students who are graduating, who are now entering into your organization's industry that you want to see on day one, knowing where healthcare is headed with AI? And we would love to hear from each of you all. That's a little, you know, selfish question as well as we continue to grow and move forward in the university.
Yeah, so if you could just go and say, I'd like 10 people who meet this job description, that's what you're asking, I would say. So first, there's definitely literacy, and I would add on top, if you're coming to our field, there's a healthcare literacy component that is, I would say, you know, head and shoulders. If you show up with that, you shine. So we have a different language, I'm not saying it's good, it may be backwards when you look at our abbreviations and our coding and why we do things, like someone's paying for something that they didn't buy, but someone else bought from them in a third party mechanism. So understanding like how healthcare exists as a business, how the federal government is involved in that from not only regulatory, but you know, what are the things that we have to meet just to run. And then from there, you have to, I believe there's sectors of skills that are helpful, and they're not necessarily all the same. There can be project management where you can be the translator. Many folks in practice right now, and I point to myself, including myself, they did not have this technology when they trained, and they became physicians, or they became nurses, and now they've been 10 or 15 years in the field, and this has all been something they've had to pick up along the way. And so if we bring in new technology and new artificial intelligence tools, we have to do change management with people and bring them up to those skill sets. And so bringing, I say kids in, because I'm old enough, I think, to say that if they're graduating now, is that you have the ability to be kind, considerate, and good communication skills to bridge that gap with folks who are very good at the bedside. I like the gentleman earlier who was in forestry, know everything about forestry. We know everything about patients, but when you put those tools in front of folks, they need help to make sure that they optimize the efficiency of those tools. So, you know, those are still just basic things, but then we're getting into, you do have to understand the technology. So we are interested in, you know, computer science, we're interested in data science. And those aren't necessarily the same things. There's those who build, there's those who analyze. And then there are those who just take it off the shelf, interpret it, and visualize it for the rest of the team. And I think that's a continuum of individuals working together to facilitate, you know, the data that we create with patients, the business that we practice. We're making it much easier to demonstrate that we're moving in the right direction as true norm. So, you know, just communication skills, being able to help with the generational gaps that know different things, the programming side, the data science side, and then the analysts who are able to tell the story about the individual patient wrapped up into the population numbers.
The only thing to add to that, it's quite comprehensive. That's a lot of work to do. You got a lot of work to do over there.
Job descriptions for it.
The oldest one up here.
The main thing I guess I'd add, in addition to those skills, is the understanding and appreciation of the ethical implications, the moral compass of the application of AI tools, that it's not just a black box and I'm just going to utilize and implement whatever it's given me for the purpose that it's been designed for. And I think some of those ethical implications are unique to healthcare. And having a student base and a programmatic structure that educates students about the ethical responsibilities of using these tools in healthcare, I think, is an important feature as well.
I'll add, I think, you know, to add to both of those points and just to talk through the question, I think where we are right now today is we're in a really good space with what LSU has been doing and what we can get from LSU, like way better than 10 years ago. And the reason I say that is because, you know, like Dr. Jagneaux mentioned, we've been part of the AI class the last 4 semesters now, and I think we've brought on 5 or 6 interns through that now, and some of them have moved on, which is great. That's what we want it for. But they have been immediately been able to come in and help our teams understand prompt engineering, like, or that new skill set that our clinical analyst that might be there for 30 years and knows everything about our EMR, it might be national epic expert, has no idea how to prompt engineer anything, right? Or in pairing them together has been really significant, and I think that's only going to continue to grow over the next, because as the technology continues changing faster and faster, our workers aren't able to keep up with that. We can reskill, but we are not close to getting to that point. So bringing in students from LSU to intern or bringing from these programs, I think has been really fantastic. And I'm happy, looking forward to seeing it grow over the next few years. So.
That's that great leadership sitting over
That's
there.
right.
I guess I'll throw out 2 requests to LSU. One comes as a mom of a 16-year-old at Catholic High. I think our high schools in Louisiana really need a curriculum on AI, and I'm just being transparent. As I look at what I'm observing from my colleagues who have kids in other countries and in other parts of the world, like, I'm really nervous that when we think about the workforce of the future in Louisiana that's going to take care of, hopefully, me and my parents, I'm nervous that we don't have the adequate resourcing, and I think that if we start younger and earlier, I won't have to send a letter to the editor of The Advocate because I'm mad that my kid got disciplined for using AI for an assignment, because he has to learn how to use it ethically. And that's something that I think is super important. But again, I think it's not just our collegiate students, but I think the next generation that's coming through will be key as well. And then my second challenge to LSU and the other healthcare institutions in Louisiana, I think Louisiana does have an opportunity to be a standout in improving health outcomes and efficiency in using technology. When I look around the world and other governments and countries and how they're managing, I think Louisiana has some very unique characteristics, and the partnerships that exist between our universities, between our healthcare systems, to where we can really be on the cutting edge, and we have the prevalence of chronic diseases. I think that we could be a real hotbed for learning and for education to not only help patients in our state, but also to help inform the rest of the world.
I absolutely agree with that. I mean, as Will mentioned, really the only other state that is in our competition to do this is Mississippi, and that's only because of their disease prevalence.
We have hospitals in both states.
I know you do, but yep. Hey, they can't compete with us, okay? I mean, you could take care of them, but
Well, footprint is Louisiana, Mississippi.
but when we think about the bridge between academia, industry, policy, and program, and that includes government, that is where the true power of combining resources to make those strides really exists.
I wanted to add, so as a Catholic High Computer Science student and LSU ISCS student, I did want to say that I do think that both schools have tremendously further ahead than they were 30 years ago. So.
Maybe some opportunities in terms of some of our educators that we're training to
but to Whitney's point, we need to keep pushing, because that's the skill sets that are needed in the environment, and it's going to keep pushing further. I wanted to talk on Jonas's point too, and I think a couple semesters ago, Dr. Jagneaux, one of the Lakes project with the AI class was a sepsis tool, and so seeing that class kind of relate to the ethics and morality and the humanity of that tool, I think was huge too, like to see how it impacted healthcare. So that was, I think that is very important as well.
So as you guys can see, we could go on and on with questions and just conversation just amongst the panelists. But I think we went over our time a little bit and cut into the Q&A. And so I want to make sure we give the opportunity to open up to questions in the audience for our panelists. Any questions?
Can you talk briefly about how AI can have an impact with wearables and ingestible sorts of technologies in the healthcare space, right? Most of us have iWatches or some sort of watch that's getting sensors, or the health app on our iPhone. I realize that was all Macintosh products there, but right, those types of technologies, there's a whole bunch of data that ideally some level of AI can help me personally, because I have these things I'm wearing, improve my health.
Yeah, I'll be happy. So there are some challenges, and I would say that they shouldn't be, but there are in integrating, in making sure people expect that if something happened on whatever, that, and it's bad for me, you're going to call me right away. And we don't have the manpower to go, your blood sugar was 1 over what it should have been, you didn't get a call from a nurse. And that's obviously minimizing, it could be an arrhythmia or certain things. But that being said, we know compliance and outcomes with blood pressure control are better with devices at home. We have a phenomenal detection of atrial fibrillation with the watch. So people have been diagnosed just because they've been wearing an Apple Watch. And so monitoring for maintaining folks in the right rhythm because they are wearing wearables. And just making sure that, I don't want to use Big Brother, but it's a little bit of that. And that, where are you? And we can tell a lot about compliance. There are innovations with you're getting on the scale, and we can have a team member call if you are, a few pounds overweight, you have heart failure. So it's not so much that we can't do it, it's about connecting what the data is generating, and what's the downstream thing we should be doing with the information. And I think that still comes back down to a people question of who do we put in charge of managing the 24/7 data stream that comes from wearables. But I'm for it. I think that we need to get comfortable with that space. We know that continuous glucose monitors are changing the way people look at diabetes and the way we treat it, knowing that sometimes we're completely wrong in our interpretation. And I'm just hoping for the day that we can bring that technology, where we say wearables at home, into the hospital. is if you've ever been in the hospital or seen, a poor, I would say, I'm envisioning grandparents where they're weighed down with wires and devices. And we could put on more friendly applications so that we capture the information and potentially even go from hospital to hospital at home. We start with a little bit and then we go with the application that allows us not to stay as long in the hospital. We reduce all the negative things of putting you in a bed and strapping you down with all this technology. So I think we have a lot of space that we need to grow into it to make it so that it's just like prescribing medicine and using technology that we are in the comfort zone where we're in now. But I do think it won't take long where that's going to be, we're prescribing, you're going to wear this, and this is how the information is going to come to your physician going forward.
This is one of the areas I think that's actually promising in cancer care anyway. My myopic view of the world in cancer care, where we can actually use AI to bend the cost curve, which is extremely close. Discussion earlier about how the things that are ultimately going to take off the quickest are the things that have in some way an economic benefit or efficiency that can be realized. And one of the most costly things that we can do in cancer care, aside from the drugs, is have patients end up in the hospital. So we can find a solution that can avoid patients having to go to the hospital and be admitted to receive care. That's going to go a long way to improving quality of life for the patient and reducing the expense of care for that patient. So you can imagine for the moment a patient having a wearable of some form that has an algorithm loaded into it that is predictive in its analysis of the biologic metrics that are being measured by the wearable. And that patient gets a note, hey, it's time to call your doctor. There's some things that are going on here that this algorithm says may land me in a few days inside of the hospital that now can be avoided if I call up my physician or have contact with the office to take some interventional steps to avoid that next thing from happening. So I think there's a lot of work going on in that area, and I actually think that's one of the more nearer term things that we may start to see some progress in.
I think that, like to Jonas's point, some of that's already happening. I think there are health systems in their areas in the country, and especially specialties that are doing that now. We technically can do that now. I think the problem is, like, we've started and stopped a number of remote patient monitoring programs because the people that are the most willing to wear the wearables and use all the technology are healthiest patients. I mean, it's like our unhealthy patients are chronic. They're the most unwilling to use those types of tools. That's going to change over time. Consumerism is going to change that over time, but that's where I think we have a lot of roadblocks right now.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for being the last panel. Didn't phone it in or use AI to generate it. I'm Steve Holliday with the Department of Transportation, and the question that came to my mind, you mentioned AI, is the software a medical device or is it treatment? And what got my attention is we do a lot of work in the transportation department with autonomous trucks. So you have an 18-wheeler going down the highway, can kill people, and their AI, several of the vendors have said, our software is the driver. So when the trooper pulls over that autonomous truck, they're going to give the driver the ticket. And they're going to take legal liability. So as a Louisiana Catholic high graduate, LSU lawyer, I'm wondering if you're thinking about whether it's going to be medical malpractice, products liability, because if y'all aren't thinking about it, I can promise you the tort lawyers are thinking about it. And just very interesting topic that I think might be covered.
It's part of the cautious approach into that getting very close to the patient and the absence of what to do in the regulatory space. We belong to a partnership that has a number of institutions. It's a consortium for AI, and we get to hear from some of the leads. One of is Tom Maddox, who's just been appointed to the FDA Digital Advisory Committee. And that very question, he said, part of, I don't know what to answer you because things are so happening with the new legislation now, and we don't know what we're going to get jurisdiction over. And they think that they're going to settle at what are the minimum standards of which if you're going to do something, such in your case, it's driving. In our case, we don't have a doctor AI prescribing. We have always a tool being used by the responsible human being. And it may be the hospital as an entity, or it may be the physician who's signing off, but using the augmentative technology, and I know most AI people hate that word, but for the purpose of this, that's really what's going on in this question. And that part, I think, is going to stay there for a while, because no one really wants, and we're getting comfortable a little bit with driverless cars, but everyone wants a physician looking over what the machine decided. And we do use the technology currently to help with reading imaging, but there's always going to be, the buck stops here. I've signed it. I'm now in charge of the result. And so we don't have that empty blanket of the AI did it. I think when it comes, there's still going to be some entity that has to be the responsible party. And if you deploy it, then if it goes wrong, you will be the one that lawyers will come and say, this was malpractice. The only thing, and people get concerned or nervous about that when we talk about it, but I would ask you, since your specialty is in transportation, do you think that driverless vehicles from here going forward versus humans as a collective group, the safer approach? I envision that both will make mistakes because both are created by humans. One is driving, one is the other is a creation. But for us, like with driving, the tools don't get tired. They don't use substances that cloud their thinking. They don't get emotional. And so if we are continuing to refine those tools, I do think that we may see that if you're not using the technology and it's only a human, then the story's going to flip. And we're gonna be like, why didn't you use the technology to help you do it better? So we're not there yet, but I think, I'm gonna not say you guys as a legal entity, but I can see you asking that question pretty soon. And like you potentially had the ability to make it, a higher functioning decision with both combined, and I feel like that's probably the right way to think about it.
I'd also like to make an appeal for a Catholic High AI task force. So at the bar and during happy hour, let's talk.
A lot of Catholic High people that
Oh,
want
no,
to
my God, you're shy, girls.
How you all doing? Christopher Anderson, marketing manager at B1 Bank. I think about healthcare as an industry that on its face, certain communities are reluctant to engage with, even outside of AI, right? I think about men and prostate and colon screenings and cancer. I think about certain communities and their reluctance to kind of engage with psychiatrics and, mental health therapy. And so there's that layer of already like skepticism there, and then you add in the skepticism of AI that people are kind of currently going through. Like, how do you all navigate it? Have you seen it kind of in your patient care, in your marketing experience? And how do you all navigate that hurdle of educating people about the service that you provide even outside of AI, but also how AI can supplement and increase that patient care or that experience as well?
That's a great question. I loved Will's comment at the beginning of this session about physicians who don't want this technology. I would venture to guess, at least in our organization, probably half of our physicians would rather go back to paper charts. And so for me, making progress, whether it be engaging physicians in the utilization of technology or engaging communities about the utilization of healthcare in general, all comes back to building trust. Building trust in an ongoing dialogue and relationship that the person that you're trying to convince really to engage in what you're asking them to participate in feels heard in the things that they're concerned about or have reservations about, that you then reflect on and then can provide to them a value proposition that overcomes whatever fear or hesitation that they have and builds a community support to engage in the thing that you're asking them to do. Now that takes time, energy, effort, discipline, and acceptance that even despite your best efforts, not everybody is going to engage. But over time, the hope is that the holdouts will diminish, and ultimately, en route to making progress, you will have moved the population of people that you're trying to reach, physicians, community, closer to where we believe the best outcome actually lives.
I'll ask a question and I'll let you guys, because I heard part of your question is convincing folks to trust, but when we try to make it easier to ask these social determinants questions and talk to folks, we found that when we talk to patients after our first few layers, so this is asking sensitive questions. Do you have enough to eat? Do you have transportation? And if you don't ask them correctly, it can be insulting. Many folks prefer to interact with a device in an anonymity or non-judgmental method. And so I'm just wondering if you think, sorry, I'm gonna ask a question. Do you think that maybe the doorway with some anonymity into that space, and particularly mental and behavioral health or sensitive topics, might be better opened by technology like AI?
I would say yes, especially if I think about the emergence of social media, and I think about the fact that my grandmother is now on social media, and I think about a world where maybe she thought that it would be the best place to ask a question about maybe something that she's experiencing. And then I also think about how comfortable she probably would be if that response came from a device versus it being kind of publicly known or even kind of sourced through other people's opinions. But I also think she would potentially trust it more as well, especially with citations that would give more confidence and belief. But I think in the trust component in any consumer industry, to me, trust is about words matching actions over time and being willing to be vulnerable and accept responsibility when things go wrong. And just like I think we've seen social media go through some of that evolution, and certainly the internet, cell phones as well, I think we'll see that with AI. And I do think we'll see adoption pick up, but I think it'll take time. And I think it does take experience for patients and for people to feel comfortable. I don't like to say patients all the time, because at the end of the day, we're all bleeding red blood. I mean, we're people.